And let's continue to finish up this little history of colonial South Africa. And so we left off with the Methakane, where the tribes are starting to fight each other. And here we are. What's the effect of the British rule on the Boers? Now, if the British are moving in, how's this going to affect the first European inhabitants? The arrival of the English really changed the economic system of the Cape. Right. On the upside, it opened up new markets for the farmers in that they could grow things in South Africa and sell them to Europe. So it's good in that way, and they can sell more stuff. However, England decided to abolish slavery in all of its colonies in 1834. They were a little early on the game. And so the Boers lost their cheap labor supply. They have a chance to sell more stuff, but they just lost their workers to produce more stuff. Plus, land is becoming more scarce as they continue to expand, and more regulated, and then it's starting to get taxed, and you're going to have to buy the land and actually do paperwork instead of just moving to an area and saying, this is mine now. And so they have to actually follow laws. They're not allowed to have slaves anymore, and so it's not as lawless. It's not the wild South Africa that they grew up in. It's changed. And so the young farmers are going to have a lot of difficulty in starting their own farms because they have to actually follow laws and not have slaves and actually buy the land and not steal the land. And so all these things are going to result in the Boers not being too happy with the British. Plus the British started a political system based on class, not race, based on, hey, do you own land? If you don't own land, you have no rights. So Boers who did not own property could not participate in the government. It was pretty much, if you're rich, you get to be in the government. If you're poor, you have no voice in your government. Too bad for you. The British also returned land seized from the Xhosa, land that the Boers hoped to use. And the Boers are starting to get pretty angry. They're getting grumpy. Here they are being grumpy. So they decide, I'm out. And they decide to move out of the Cape Colony further inland to form their own countries further inside of South Africa. And this is known as the Great Trek. So thousands of Afrikaners migrate north out of the British Cape Colony, which at this point is just this little chunk. And they decide, yeah, I'm out. I'm going to move into this area up here. And so this is a big defining moment in their history. They form two independent republics, the Orange Free State and the Transvaal. And this creates a society based on race instead of class, with the interest of white farmers and white people coming ahead of the African population. So here are the estates as of this point, and here are the angry Boers. And part of that movement is going to result in some violence as they're moving to this new area. And so how did the Afrikaners use the Battle of Blood River to define their identity? For the most part, yeah, they wanted land, and they wanted easy, cheap land, and they wanted to own slaves. And so most wanted land, but there was a religious aspect for some of the population. And they saw this as fulfilling the will of God, comparing the trek to the flight of the Israelites, the Old Testament Israelites from Egypt, especially with the Battle of Blood River, 1838. And this was a minor battle between the Zulu and the Afrikaners. The Zulu were overwhelmed because the Boers had better weapons. This was spears versus guns. And they turned the Nkome River red with the blood of 3,000 warriors. And so this is where the river usually is. It looks like it's dried up in this picture. And they circled the wagons, much like the stories that we have of Americans settling the Wild West. They are settling the wild interior of South Africa by circling the wagons and using weapons against the local natives. So it's very similar to our Wild West stories. Minor battle. But this becomes a big part of their history, and they mythologize it and becomes a much bigger story than what it actually probably was. And they claimed that right before the battle, the Trek Boers asked God to grant them victory over their enemies, and in exchange, they would build a church to worship God. And this victory was celebrated annually for the next around 150 years. And so every year they celebrate this covenant, this deal with God, and victory until the late 20th century. So it's all the way up into the 1980s. They're still celebrating this thing and mythologizing that this is their land given to them by God. more than anything, it's used as a way to support their claims of superiority over others. And so if you go there today, there is even, and these are all bronze statues of the exact site and exactly where the wagons were. And so it becomes a big, important part of their history. What about the Asians? How'd they get there? Well, the British landowners had a labor shortage because they couldn't buy Africans anymore through the slave trade. And so instead they turned to the Indians as very cheap labor. And so they have a labor shortage for the sugar plantations in the Natal colony in the eastern South Africa. And so they bring in workers from the British colony in India. They need cheap labor, and so here they are. 1860 to 1866, 6,000 Indians show up as indentured servants looking for a good deal, some way to make money that they could send back to their families. And this really starts a significant Indian community in South Africa. It's still small, but definitely there, not going anywhere. And so this is one of the reasons that Gandhi decides to move to kind of serve these workers and kind of help out these workers within South Africa. And so Gandhi is serving the interest of specifically the Indian community, not necessarily the interest of the African community. And so you can look up some of his quotes, which he is not too friendly with the black community. And part of it is that Gandhi was British and he's growing up in this pretty nasty system where blacks are looked down upon. And he's also concentrating on looking out for the rights of Indians. And so recently Gandhi has been criticized for his racism while in South Africa because of this interest in only serving the Indian community and possibly contributing to looking down upon blacks in South Africa. Mineral Revolution. Another big thing that they find diamonds and gold there. And so the Afrikaner prospectors discover the first of several gold and diamond deposits. And so first they find diamonds in the city of Kimberley in this area. They find gold in Witwatersrand in 1886. And this leads to another shift in the economy, politics, and race relations. So this could have just been a slowly growing farming colony. But then they find something that could make them very, very wealthy, diamonds and gold. So everything shifts. Everyone wants to move there again, and it becomes much more important. And England was fine with just letting the Dutch move out to the middle of the country until they find gold and diamonds there. And they didn't really want to deal with managing the interior because it can be expensive to fight the Dutch and expensive to set up a government. But then there's diamonds and gold. And so they start little fights here and there, small skirmishes between the British and the Afrikaner forces start up when there's something to fight over. Britain continues to expand the empire through violent conquest of African societies to develop this mineral industry to get the diamond, to get the gold. And it starts a trend of Africans moving into the cities. So we see a shift where the Africans are moving out of the country and into the cities to work along these diamond mines, copper mines, gold mines. And so also, as thousands of jobs are created in the mines, thousands of jobs are also created along the trade routes to get the gold and diamonds along trade routes to feed all these miners. So it's creating other jobs beyond just mining jobs, but everything's around the mining jobs. Deep mining for gold, and that's basically boring a giant hole in the world. Deep mining for gold needed thousands of workers and very heavy machinery, so a lot of investment to get it started, especially because South African ore, and ore is the rocks that you can squeeze the gold out of, and that there's just a little bit of gold in a big old rock. For example, it's going to take 2 tons of gold ore to produce just 3/4 of an ounce of gold. And so it's quite a lot of work to produce that much rock, just get a little bit of gold. So you need a lot of very cheap labor to get something out of the mines. And so that's where Britain comes up with a tax system to force Africans to work. And so they're going to tax the Africans so much that the Africans will be forced to work in the mines to pay off their taxes. Otherwise, they would lose their land. And so they just increase the taxes until they have to work. They can't just stay in the land as farmers. They wouldn't be able to make enough money. And so this results in a wave of unskilled laborers looking for work. And faced with British taxes, they arrive to work in the mines. The workers are going to be housed in closed compounds. They're only allowed to live in their bunk that's right next to the mine. and this allows the mine owners to control the workers, but also to prevent theft. The wages were often incredibly low. They are very insufficient to actually support a family, so the family might still run the farm, while the father or brother, whoever male is working in the mines, is going to try to produce some money to help the family, but they still got to feed themselves. Deep mining requires thousands of workers for extended periods of time, so they may be working for 11 months a year. And contracts required workers to stay for about a year. And the system developed where men leave for 11 months, they might see their family once a month for a year. The rest of the family is just going to be out farming. Deserters, and so if you sign the contract saying you're going to be a miner for a year, and then you just want to go see your family, and you try to leave, you could be jailed for breaking your contract. And so there's a lot of incentive just to keep working, otherwise you go to jail, and you're not going to have a good time. And so further control of these mine workers. The pass system is developed, and we're going to see that further in apartheid, was developed to end deserters and force workers into the mines. So all African men had to carry booklets with their name, their address, and who they worked for. And any man without a pass or a pass that didn't have a current employer could be jailed or assigned a employer and forced to work. So the English definitely figured out a way to make sure that everybody's working in the mines, and that if you don't have a job, you either go to jail or you get a job. Any man who traveled to a new district and didn't find work within 3 days could be kicked out of that district unless he found a job. And so this is going to be another way just to control people. The compound system. So here's an example of the compound. And here's some other men within one of the compounds. Barracks. So each of these little houses could house 20 to 30 men. Overall, each big mine would have about 3,000 men, and they were confined to each compound for their contract periods. Men would often sleep on, you can see them here, these concrete bunks, and they'd usually have over mud floors, and if they're lucky they might have some type of mat within the concrete bunk. Often had no windows, but usually include a small wash area and a coal fire for warmth in each barrack, because it can get pretty cold. The food provided was really not enough to sustain these workers through this hard work. And so many of these men would end up in the hospital due to poor nutrition. It's hard work, it's difficult work, dangerous work, so thousands would die each year. And these closed compounds where you would live and die in the same place, it did work in that it decreased desertion rates. It was harder to run away, because if you got caught with a passbook, you'd just be shipped back. And it did keep labor costs very low because you had no other option. So how did it change South Africa? Well, it changed the people, and it definitely changed the landscape. Here's an example of one of these open pit mines that just it's kind of a scar on the earth. South Africa quickly evolved from a rural agricultural state, and they developed quite a bit as a result of it. So there's good and bad to it. They developed to become an urban industrial nation with the richest gold and diamond mines in the world. If you want gold and diamonds, South Africa's the place to get it. If you've heard of the diamond company, De Beers, huge South African company. Johannesburg is surrounded by gold deposits, and so it becomes the largest city in sub-Saharan Africa because of that gold. Mining does cause a shift in how Britain controls and governs the area, and so they move it from rule based on class to rule based on racial segregation. Africans become much poorer under the system. 1896-7, another cattle epidemic kills off 90% of the cattle owned by black African communities. It worsened the relationship between the Afrikaner republics and the British Empire. And so there's more tension because there's more money. More money, more problems. So it's time for a war. And the English decide, all right, we're done with the Boers messing around. Let's go to war. Afrikaners were growing wealthy from the gold mining industry, but most of the mines were actually owned by the British companies. And Britain was concerned that it would lose control of these mines and these largest gold fields in the world. English miners, slowly but surely, they start to move into the Republic of Transvaal. They're moving into the Dutch areas. And they start to demand the right to vote. And these are known as Uitlanders. 1895, Britain starts to demand political reform in this Republic of Transvaal to weaken the economic control of the Afrikaners and really to favor the English people living there. There is even an attempted coup against the Afrikaner leadership, and this makes things a little worse as they try to wipe out the other guy. Within 4 years, the Afrikaners attack the British, and we get a full-on war. Britain brings in 500,000 troops to destroy the Boers that number only about 40,000. Britain starts a scorched earth campaign because the Boers are so outnumbered, they know that a head-to-head battle they're going to lose, so they go for guerrilla war style tactics. And so they're just going to be fighting here and there, attacking when they can in secret. And so what the British decide to do is burn it all. In a scorched earth campaign, they're going to destroy the homes of the Boers. They're going to burn down the farms. And so they're trying to get them psychologically by destroying the homes if they can't actually find the men because they're hiding out in the middle of nowhere. Hundreds of thousands of Afrikaner women and children will be, once their homes were burned down by the British, they would be taken and placed in concentration camps, where 28,000 would die from disease. And so Afrikaner nationalism definitely does increase. They lose the war, but they do retain their identity as Afrikaners. They're going to be pretty angry with the British as a result of this war. What about the Africans? How does it affect them? And so here's an example of one of the concentration camps where you get thousands and thousands of people, and then one of the examples of the burning homesteads. It used to be called the Anglo-Boer War, but black Africans were fighting on both sides, and so now we call it the South African War because it's more complex than just the Boers. Many will suffer as a result of this scorched earth policy and the concentration camp policies. Thousands of black workers on Afrikaner farms will be rounded up, placed in the camps, and some of the Africans supported the British, hoping that the British would give them further rights. Good luck with that. We get a peace treaty guaranteeing that the British could continue to employ cheap labor at the mines, and that the Afrikaners could maintain internal political control. And so they don't get to it's now going to be British territory, but they still get to kind of be in charge of their own states. Africans, they don't get anything. The same racial status is the same. 1910, the British colonies and the Afrikaner republics joined together to become the Union of South Africa. Self-governance, but they're still part of the British Empire, so kind of like Canada or Australia, and that they get kind of independence. All white males could vote regardless of property, but only some Africans had limited voting rights, and so they could maybe vote sometimes. Unification allowed whites to continue to increase their wealth while preventing blacks from doing the same. Even though it's a majority black population, the whites are going to be in charge. Lesotho and Swaziland, and so these little chunks of lands here that, they are not part of South Africa, in that they didn't have the natural mineral resources. They didn't have the diamonds and gold, or at least it wasn't easy to get those diamonds and gold, and so they were never really taken. There were attempts, but in the end, this area was too mountainous, Lesotho was too mountainous, and the warriors there were pretty tough. They were able to fight off the whites. And then Swaziland over here was too much desert, and so it was hard to grow food over there. As a result, it was never taken. And so that's our look at South Africa.